What if I told you that while one president was bragging about an excellent phone call on social media, the other one was quietly playing chess on a global board, making moves that could reshape the entire balance of power between the two biggest economies on the planet? Folks, what just happened between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping is way more than a friendly phone call. This is a masterclass in geopolitical strategy, and if you are not paying attention, you're going to miss the biggest shift in international relations we have seen in years. Stay with me because today we are breaking down everything from trade wars and rare earth weapons to Taiwan, Iran, and the mind-blowing fact that Xi Jinping spoke to Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump on the very same day. This is not just news. This is the kind of stuff that shapes the world your kids are going to live in. So if you find this content valuable, do me a huge favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really going on behind the headlines. Let's get into it. On February 4th, 2026, United States President Donald Trump picked up his phone and posted on Truth Social that he had just completed what he called an excellent telephone conversation with President Xi Jinping of China. He described it as long and thorough, covering everything from trade and military issues to his planned trip to Beijing in April, Taiwan, the war between Russia and Ukraine, the situation in Iran, oil and gas purchases, soybean deals, and airplane engine deliveries. Trump was glowing. He wrote that the relationship with China and his personal relationship with President Xi is an extremely good one, and they both realize how important it is to keep it that way. He even said the call was all very positive with an exclamation point. Now, on the surface, that sounds great, right? Two world leaders having a productive chat, keeping things friendly, talking about buying more soybeans. But here is where things get really interesting and, honestly, a little bit unsettling if you are watching this from Washington. Because while Trump was raving about how excellent everything was, Beijing told a very different story. The Chinese readout from the state news agency Xinhua was far more measured, more calculated, and way more strategic. According to Beijing, Xi Jinping told Trump that he was willing to steer the giant ship of China-U.S. relations steadily forward through winds and storms and accomplish more big things and good things. That sounds poetic, right? But make no mistake, that is diplomatic language for we are going to keep doing what we are doing, and we expect you to play by our terms. And here is the kicker. While Trump was posting about soybeans and airplane engines, the Chinese government made crystal clear that the most important issue they discussed was Taiwan. Not trade, not Iran, not Ukraine, Taiwan. Xi told Trump directly that Taiwan is part of China's territory, that China must safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that Taiwan will never be allowed to separate from China. He also warned the United States to handle the issue of arms sales to Taiwan with great caution. Now, why does that matter so much? Because just back in December, the United States announced a massive arms sales package to Taiwan valued at more than $10 billion, including medium-range missiles, drones, and howitzers. That move infuriated Beijing. And in late December, China responded by holding military drills in the waters and airspace around Taiwan's main island. So when Xi brings up Taiwan as the #1 priority in a call that Trump described as excellent and all very positive, that tells you something. Beijing is not backing down 1 inch on what it considers its core interest. And the fact that Trump's own 2026 National Defense Strategy, published just last month, made absolutely no mention of Taiwan, that is a signal that is being watched very carefully in both Beijing and Taipei. Now, let us talk about the timing of this call, because the timing is absolutely everything. On the very same day, just hours before speaking with Trump, Xi Jinping held a virtual meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Think about that for a second. The leader of the world's second-largest economy talks to Russia's president in the afternoon, and then picks up the phone to talk to the American president the same evening. That is not a coincidence. That is a deliberate, calculated display of diplomatic positioning. During the video call with Putin, she said that China and Russia should work together to maintain global strategic stability because the international situation has become increasingly turbulent. Putin, for his part, called their conversation a continuation of a tradition they have established, holding face-to-face talks at the beginning of each year. And get this, the call took place on Lichuan, the traditional Chinese solar term that marks the beginning of spring. Putin even referenced it, saying that in terms of Russia-China relations, spring continues throughout the year, no matter the season. You cannot make this stuff up. The symbolism was thick. And Putin accepted an invitation to visit China in the first half of 2026, while Trump announced his own planned visit to Beijing in April. So now you have a situation where the leaders of both the United States and Russia are lining up to visit Xi Jinping on his home turf. If that does not tell you who is holding the cards right now, I do not know what does. Let's dig deeper into why analysts are saying Beijing came out ahead in this whole exchange. Patricia Kim from the Brookings Institution put it bluntly. She said Beijing is particularly pleased with its own handling of the trade war with the United States, which Chinese analysts largely view as having played out to China's advantage. She explained that from Beijing's perspective, Trump's evident desire to reach a trade deal with China, combined with the expectation of multiple leader-level meetings over the course of 2026, has effectively bought China time and strategic breathing room from the most hawkish policy impulses in Washington. In other words, while Washington is focused on making deals and getting wins it can post about on social media, Beijing is buying time. Time to strengthen its position. Time to diversify its trade relationships. Time to solidify its alliances. And that is exactly what we are seeing play out. Melanie Hart from the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub made an even more pointed observation. She said the real story coming out of this call is forward-looking, and it is a major win for Beijing. Here is why. China's biggest concern with Trump is his unpredictability. So what are they doing? They are using an extraordinary lineup of pre-scheduled 2026 meetings to box him in and force a degree of, if not quite predictability, at least what she calls planability, in U.S.-China relations. Think about what 2026 looks like now. Trump plans to visit Beijing in April. China is hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders meeting in Shenzhen in November. The United States is hosting the G20 summit in December, and Xi might attend. That means the entire year is going to be consumed with preparations for these high-level meetings. And each one of those meetings gives China the opportunity to script the interaction and press for new waves of U.S. concessions to lay the groundwork for a good meeting. Hart also pointed out something critical. She said Chinese leaders are strategic and their diplomats are strong. They will know exactly what they want ahead of these summits and exactly where their red lines are. There is still no indication that the U.S. side has the same strategic clarity. The White House will need to prioritize developing it fast. That is a pretty damning assessment, folks. Now let us get into the trade war, because this is where it gets really juicy. Remember, Trump started this whole tariff battle back in 2025. Tariffs on Chinese goods climbed as high as 145% by April of that year, with Beijing retaliating with tariffs of its own reaching 125%. It was an all-out economic war. But here is what happened. After negotiations and an in-person meeting between Trump and Xi in Busan, South Korea in October 2025, the U.S. reduced tariffs to 47.5%, while China lowered theirs to 31.9%. And during this latest phone call, Trump claimed China agreed to buy 20 million tons of American soybeans for the current season and committed to 25 million tons for next season. He also mentioned purchases of oil and gas and airplane engine deliveries. Sounds like a win for the U.S., right? Well, not so fast. The director of Beijing-based consultancy Trivium China pointed out that there is no market logic right now for China to be buying a bunch more U.S. soybeans, especially as Brazil's harvest is coming in. Brazilian beans are cheaper. So why would China pay more for American soybeans? Because it smooths the path for an even more productive and lucrative state visit by Trump in April. In other words, China is buying soybeans the way you bring a bottle of wine when you go to someone's house for dinner. It is a gesture, not a concession. And in the grand scheme of a trade relationship worth hundreds of billions of dollars, 12 million tons of soybeans is not exactly a game changer. Meanwhile, look at what China has actually gained from this trade war. Their exports to countries other than the U.S. soared throughout 2025. China's total trade surplus hit nearly $1.2 trillion last year, a 20% increase. They now produce more than 28% of the world's total manufactured output, more than the United States, Germany, and Japan combined. Car exports alone could jump to 8 million vehicles in 2026, up from 6 million last year. And while all of this was happening, Beijing was quietly working on roughly 20 new trade agreements designed to stitch its $19 trillion economy into the world's biggest economic blocs, including the European Union, Gulf states, and the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact. One Chinese official was even quoted saying, "Do not interrupt your opponent when he is making a mistake," referring to Trump's disruptive trade agenda. If that does not send a chill down your spine, I do not know what will. And then there is the rare earths weapon. This is something most people do not talk about enough, but it might be the single most important leverage China has over the United States right now. Critical minerals, including rare earth metals like samarium and promethium, are essential for manufacturing everything from smartphones and electric cars to fighter jets and advanced weapon systems. China dominates the mining and processing of these minerals. During the trade war, Beijing tightened export controls on rare earth metals, and that move dealt a serious blow to U.S. supplies and affected American industries across the board. Over two-thirds of surveyed experts said China played its hand well when it used rare earth restrictions as a negotiating tool. Only 23% thought Beijing overplayed it. The strategy was devastatingly effective. China agreed only to pause critical mineral export controls for a year. In return, the U.S. cut its tariffs and agreed to allow China to buy sophisticated semiconductors. Think about that trade. China temporarily pauses restrictions on minerals it can turn back on any time, and in exchange gets access to advanced chips and lower tariffs. That is not a fair trade. That is leverage. Trump responded by announcing Project Vault, a $12 billion U.S. critical mineral reserve, and held a ministerial with representatives from 50 countries to discuss diversifying supply chains. Vice President J.D. Vance even proposed a critical mineral trading bloc. But here is the reality. Reducing reliance on China for rare earths is going to take years, possibly decades. And Beijing knows it. As one analysis pointed out, China is likely to use its current market position to make it as expensive and difficult as possible for Washington to escape Beijing's grip in this sector. They have done it before back in previous decades by dumping rare earths at low prices to put alternative mines out of business. There is no reason to think they will not do it again. Now, let us talk about Iran, because this was clearly on Trump's mind during the call. Tensions between Washington and Tehran are at a boiling point. There have been deadly crackdowns on anti-government demonstrations in Iran, and Trump has been openly talking about military action that analysts say could lead to regime change. The U.S. has been massing military forces in the Arabian Sea, and it already attacked 3 Iranian nuclear sites during last July's Iran-Israel war. Trump announced a 25% tariff on countries trading with Iran, specifically designed to pressure nations like China to stop buying Iranian oil. China is Iran's largest trading partner and buys most of its oil. Iran managed $125 billion in trade back in 2024, including $32 billion with China. But here is the thing. China has shown zero signs of cutting its trade ties with either Iran or Russia. As Patricia Kim from Brookings noted, Chinese officials frame their economic relationships as matters of sovereignty and principle, and insist they will continue trading with partners of their choosing. And the Trump administration has not explicitly tied trade negotiations to pressuring China on Iran or Russia, which makes it even easier for Beijing to ignore those requests. And speaking of Russia, that brings us to the war in Ukraine. The U.S. is trying to broker a permanent ceasefire, with Russian and Ukrainian officials meeting in Abu Dhabi for talks brokered by Washington. But China remains Russia's strongest economic lifeline. Beijing imports Russian oil, coal, timber, and copper. Both countries are founding members of BRICS, and together with Iran, they even participated in joint military training in South Africa last month. Xi and Putin's video call on the same day, as the Trump call was clearly designed to send a message. Their positions on international issues, as Putin's aide Ushakov noted, practically coincide. That includes their assessment of Trump's Board of Peace Initiative. Russia and China are presenting a united front, and the more the U.S. tries to isolate one, the closer the other seems to move toward Beijing. So where does all of this leave us? Let me break it down for you. What we are witnessing is not just a phone call between two presidents. It is a fundamental shift in how the great powers are positioning themselves for the rest of 2026 and beyond. Xi Jinping is playing the long game. He has mapped out the entire year, with summit after summit creating a framework that constrains Trump's ability to be unpredictable. He has maintained his alliance with Russia while engaging with the U.S. on terms that benefit China. He has used rare earths as a weapon, extracted concessions in the trade war while minimizing his own, and kept his firm stance on Taiwan without facing any real consequences. Beijing is also accelerating its outreach to the rest of the world. Western leaders have been lining up to visit China. Canada's Prime Minister Carney went to Beijing. Britain's Keir Starmer visited. Germany's Friedrich Merz was expected to go in February. Countries that used to look primarily to Washington are now hedging their bets, and China is positioning itself as the more reliable, more predictable partner. The experts at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs summed it up perfectly. Both the U.S. and China believe they have the advantage, but only one can be right. And right now, the evidence suggests that Beijing has the stronger hand. China can suffer more pain. Their leadership has a clearer strategy. They are diversifying their trade relationships at breakneck speed. And they have leverage through rare earths, through their manufacturing dominance, through their relationships with Russia and Iran, that the United States simply cannot match in the short term. Now, does that mean America is out of the game? Absolutely not. The United States still produces 25 times more high-end artificial intelligence chips than China. Chinese AI startups have been forced to delay products because of semiconductor shortages. China still settles roughly 2/3 of its foreign trade in dollars. These are enormous advantages that Washington can build on, but only if there is a coherent, long-term strategy to match Beijing's. And right now, based on what we are seeing, the question is whether anyone in Washington is thinking that far ahead. Folks, this is the world we are living in right now. The phone call that Trump called excellent might just be the moment history looks back on as the beginning of a new era in great power competition, one where China holds more cards than ever before. And the question is not whether the next chapter of this story will be dramatic. It will be. The question is whether the United States will be ready for it. If this video opened your eyes to what is really happening behind the scenes, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with your friends, your family, anyone who cares about where this world is headed. We put a lot of work into breaking these stories down so you do not have to wade through the noise. Turn on notifications